The moment Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez told President Trump that he represented everything wrong with capitalism on live television, she made the catastrophic mistake that every socialist seems to make. She completely forgot she was attacking a self-made billionaire who actually understands economics, while she couldn't explain where $93 trillion for the Green New Deal would come from. Fox News had organized the Great American Debate between capitalism and socialism as the political event of the year and possibly even the decade. The idea had started as a casual suggestion during a Fox and Friends segment, asking if it wouldn't be amazing if Trump actually debated AOC about economics. The audience response had been so overwhelming that within 48 hours the network had committed to making the event happen. They reached out to both camps, offered prime-time coverage, and promoted it as the conversation America desperately needed to hear. To everyone's surprise, both sides agreed, as AOC's team had convinced her this was her chance to educate Fox News viewers about democratic socialism. They wanted to show America that progressive economics made sense, and to prove she was more than just a social media sensation. They had spent weeks preparing her, bringing in economists to help her understand the Nordic model and practicing responses to every anticipated attack. They prepared talking points about wealth inequality, climate change, and corporate greed while coordinating with friendly media outlets to provide sympathetic coverage. They were confident that her charisma, communication skills, and passionate advocacy would win over viewers who had never heard the socialist case presented properly. However, they had fundamentally misunderstood both their candidate and their opponent, because Trump's team had agreed immediately for one simple reason. Trump had been waiting for this moment for years, having watched AOC spread economic nonsense on social media and attack capitalism while living in luxury. He had watched her propose trillion-dollar programs with no funding plan and position herself as the voice of working people despite growing up in wealthy suburbs. He had watched her chase Amazon out of New York, destroying 25,000 jobs and calling it a victory. And he watched her promote the Green New Deal without being able to explain basic cost projections. He had watched her become the face of progressive economics despite demonstrating complete economic illiteracy. And now he was going to destroy her on live television in front of 20 million people. AOC had agreed because she thought she could educate Fox News viewers about democratic socialism. So she prepared her talking points about Nordic countries and corporate greed. She wore her most expensive designer outfit, which was ironic given the topic, and she had practiced her narrative about being just a girl from the Bronx. She was ready to go viral with clips of her destroying Trump. But Trump had agreed because he never backs down from a fight and had been waiting for this moment. He brought something AOC hadn't anticipated, including a calculator, her tax returns, photos of her luxury lifestyle, and the complete cost breakdown of the Green New Deal that her office had tried to bury. He had done his homework and prepared his receipts, ready to give America the economics lesson that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had somehow missed despite her degree from Boston University. What happened in the next 90 minutes would expose the biggest fraud in progressive politics, turn tax the rich into a punchline, and reduce a social media superstar to a humiliated backbencher. If you have ever wanted to see what happens when someone who actually built an empire meets someone who bartended and thinks that qualifies her for economics, this is it. Wait until Trump pulls out her salary complaint at minute 38, because her face says everything about the situation. The Fox News studio in Manhattan was packed beyond fire code capacity, and security had to turn away hundreds who tried to get in. The audience of 500 was roughly split, with Trump supporters in MAGA hats on one side and AOC supporters in socialist gear on the other, with a small section of undecided voters in the middle. The set was designed for maximum drama, with two podiums facing each other at an angle and massive screens looming behind them for displaying evidence. Sean Hannity sat at a moderator's desk between them, looking like a man who knew he was about to witness either the greatest debate or the greatest disaster in television history. Backstage, the contrast was perfect, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's green room buzzed with activity, and 8 staffers were coordinating social media strategy. A communications director was preparing viral clip ideas. 2 economists were trying to help her understand actual economics, and a stylist put on the finishing touches. A crisis team stood by ready to launch GOP attack narratives if the night went sideways, while AOC herself sat reviewing flashcards filled with data on inequality and Nordic healthcare. She was certain her massive following and progressive credibility would win the day. But Trump's green room was a completely different story. It was just him with his notes and a Diet Coke, featuring no frantic aides, no spin doctors, and no economists explaining the basics. Just Trump being Trump, checking his talking points, refining his punchlines, and smirking at what he is about to do to the left's social media star. He has built Manhattan skyscrapers, spent 50 years navigating the New York real estate jungle, and won the White House when no one thought he could. Now he is ready to school a former bartender turned congresswoman on economics live on TV, and a producer calls out 2 minutes until airtime. Trump stands, fixes his trademark red tie, and walks toward the stage with the swagger of a man who has played this game 1,000 times and never lost. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez steps out first, to a roar of applause from her supporters and a polite nod from the rest of the room. She is wearing a cream-colored designer suit that likely costs more than most Americans pay in monthly rent, a detail Trump is sure to pounce on. She waves to the lens with influencer precision, flashes the bright smile that has fueled 1,000 Instagram posts, and takes her spot at the podium. She stands with the poise of someone who has never faced a true heavyweight, and 30 seconds later, President Trump enters to an ovation so massive it literally makes the cameras vibrate. The cheering goes on for nearly a minute, forcing Sean Hannity to keep signaling the crowd for silence so the broadcast can begin. Wearing his classic dark suit and red tie, Trump waves to point out a few familiar faces and settles in with the easy confidence of a man who has owned much bigger stages. Sean Hannity opened the night by outlining the format, which included moderator questions, rebuttals, direct debate, and audience questions at the finish. He stressed the need for deep discussion and mutual respect, but everyone knew that respect would last about 90 seconds. Let's start with a core question about our economic systems, Sean began, asking Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez to explain her advocacy for democratic socialism. She cut him off to pivot to her planned attack, stating that before they talk theory, it is important to address what they are actually debating here. Her voice takes on that earnest and breathless tone that works wonders on social media as she turns and looks Trump right in the eye. She claims President Trump is the poster child for everything wrong with capitalism, citing the greed, the exploitation, and the hoarding of wealth. She describes a system rigged for billionaires while the working class drowns, claiming he was born into wealth and stepped on workers to get ahead. She asserts he is here to protect a system that has failed millions of regular Americans, and the crowd begins to murmur as she goes on the attack from the jump. She argues we need democratic socialism like they have in Nordic countries, where health care is a right and education is free. She says billionaires should pay their fair share, and working families should finally get a shot at the American dream that capitalism has from them. A bartender trying to lecture a billionaire on economics is going to be interesting." And a massive grin spreads across Trump's face. She just handed him the perfect introduction, and he asks if he should call her Alexandria, or if she prefers Sandy since that is her real name. Sandy from Westchester. Trump speaks with his thick Queen's accent already cutting through the room, and the audience breaks into laughter as he scores a point. He says he loves the subject of capitalism versus socialism because he has actually lived it and built real things like skyscrapers you can touch. He emphasizes businesses that provide jobs for thousands of people, calling it real-world capitalism, but then pauses to let the moment hang there. He asks her to confirm she has an economics degree from Boston University, noting it is a very expensive school that probably cost her folks a fortune. AOC starts to look a bit uneasy and tries to say her education is not the point, but Trump interjects cheerfully that it really matters. Since you have that degree, you ought to understand the basics of the economy. So explain something to me, he said while pulling out a tablet. He gave it a tap, and footage started playing on the big screens behind them, showing a clip of AOC in an interview. The clip showed her saying with total sincerity that unemployment is low only because everyone has 2 jobs and people are working 60 or 80 hours a week. Trump let the whole video play through, then turned to her with a look of mock bewilderment, saying that is simply not how unemployment works. He explained that unemployment simply measures the percentage of people who are out of work. So if someone has 2 jobs, they are counted as one employed person. He shifted his attention toward the crowd and noted, this woman has an economics degree, yet doesn't even grasp how unemployment is calculated. The room exploded in laughter, and even some of her own supporters looked visibly uneasy as Trump prepared to dive into her greatest economic achievement. He asked if everyone remembered Amazon, and how Jeff Bezos wanted to build their second headquarters right here in New York. That move would have brought 25,000 jobs to her district, representing high-paying tech positions that New York is desperate for. He pulled up a set of statistics on the screen showing $27 billion in revenue for New York over the next decade, along with employment growth. He noted this was everything she claimed to fight for, and then pointed a dramatic finger right at her to explain what she did. You ran them out of town and attacked the tax incentives, which were the very breaks offered to Amazon to come here. You actually claimed that money could have been spent on other things. And Trump shook his head in a show of pure theatrical disbelief. That is just not how tax incentives function, Alexandria, because this is basic entry-level economics. And we were not handing Amazon a check. We were just promising to take a smaller cut of their money if they showed up and hired people, he explained while turning back to the crowd. Without Amazon coming to the city, New York doesn't see a single dime of those taxes, so they get absolutely nothing. You turned $27 billion over 10 years into a big fat zero. And the worst part is, you celebrated it as some kind of victory. The crowd was starting to lose their minds because Trump was completely in his element and clearly winning the argument. You have a degree in economics, but you clearly don't understand the basics of unemployment or tax breaks or how a business operates. He leaned over his podium toward her and suggested that maybe she ought to stick to mixing drinks because economics clearly isn't her strong suit. The whole building erupted while AOC's face turned bright red, and Sean Hannity looked like he was fighting back a smirk. She holds an economics degree, but managed to chase away 25,000 jobs. So comment, bartender, if you still remember that Amazon disaster. AOC tried to push back by retreating to her usual talking points, claiming this is the perfect example of the wealthy elite protecting a system built on exploitation. Trump cut her off with a delighted smirk, saying it was perfect to talk about rich people and specifically about her. He reached down and grabbed a folder, flipping it open with a flourish to say, "Nothing screams champion of the working class like designer shoes." He brought up the Met Gala from September of 2021 and asked if she remembered that night as a photo popped up on the screen. It showed AOC in a white gown with tax, the rich emblazoned in red across the back, posing on the carpet among stars and cameras. Trump started reading from his notes like he was assessing a piece of real estate, noting the ticket price for the Met Gala was $35,000. That is more than half of what the average American family earns in a year, all spent for one party. He looked up at her and pointed out she wore a dress that said, "Tax the rich," while partying at an event filled with billionaires. "Do you really not see the irony in that?" he asked, and the audience was laughing so hard that people were literally in tears. "But wait, there is more," Trump said, as he pulled out even more photos to show her apartment building in the Navy Yard. It was a stunning building with every luxury amenity imaginable, and the rent is $1,700 a month, which is more than most mortgages. Another picture flashed on the screen showing her Manolo Blahnik shoes she wore to a photo op specifically about income inequality. The price tag was $580 for a single pair of shoes, and he set the photos down to address the audience. She pulls in $174,000 a year as a congresswoman, which is the standard salary for every member of Congress. "Do you know what she had to say about it?" he asked, playing a clip of AOC claiming the salary makes it hard to afford living in D.C. "It is a struggle," Trump repeated with total disbelief, noting the median household income in this country is $70,000. "She makes more than double the average, and she is complaining it is not enough," he said as he walked to the very edge of his podium. He listed the Met Gala ticket, the luxury apartment, and the designer heels. Yet she claims her salary isn't enough. "Let's not forget the Tesla you drive while you are busy attacking fossil fuels," Trump said as he turned to face her directly. "You aren't a socialist, Alexandria. You are a champagne socialist and just a high-end liberal with a flashier brand. You are loaded, and maybe not a billionaire like I am, but you are in the top 10% of American earners while pretending you are not. You are living in luxury while lecturing working-class folks about how they need to sacrifice more." And he just shook his head at her. "At least I don't hide the fact that I am wealthy, because I actually enjoy being rich. And I constructed skyscrapers. I made a fortune, and I am proud of that. But look at you wearing tax the rich gowns to galas that cost more than most Americans earn. That isn't standing up for people. That is just being a hypocrite with some nice Instagram filters." The crowd jumped to their feet in a massive ovation, and AOC looked like she was ready to vanish into thin air. Share this video if you spot the hypocrisy of complaining about a salary while buying expensive tickets and luxury items. Sean Hannity finally tried to take back the reins and move the conversation toward actual policy, specifically the Green New Deal. "Oh, let's definitely do that," Trump cut in eagerly, whipping out what looked like a calculator to run some numbers. He said this was the kind of math Alexandria clearly skipped when she was drafting her Green New Deal, because she can't tell you where the money comes from. Trump gave the calculator a dramatic tap and said the Green New Deal estimates show it would cost a staggering $93 trillion over a decade. He held up the calculator so everyone could see the figure and explained that breaks down to $600,000 for every household. "Can you guys afford an extra 600 grand?" he asked, and the crowd roared back no, while Trump added that neither could he. Trump flashed a grin and reminded them he is a billionaire, then put the calculator aside and pulled some documents up on the big screen. He said the really funny part is that when her team first released the Green New Deal, they put out an FAQ to explain the details. He stopped for a second to let that sink in and noted they wiped it from the internet within hours because people started asking questions. The deleted FAQ flashed on the screen as Trump began reading it aloud in a theatrical voice, highlighting economic security for those unwilling to work. They literally wanted to cut checks for people who just didn't feel like showing up, and the crowd let out a chorus of boos. We set a goal for net zero instead of absolute zero because we are just not sure if we can totally eliminate farting cows. The room absolutely erupted with laughter, and Trump had to pause and wait for the noise to die down before continuing. Farting cows was actually in their official document because they were legitimately stressed out about it, and he let out a snort. Then he kept reading about building enough high-speed rail so that flying on an airplane isn't even necessary anymore. She really wanted to get rid of planes. So how exactly do you plan on getting to Hawaii? Or are you going to swim there? Even some of the AOC fans in the room couldn't help but laugh as Trump finally set the paper down. I asked my experts how on earth we pay for $93 trillion, and every single economist told me you simply can't. It is literally impossible to fund, even if you taxed every billionaire at 100% and took every cent we have. Even if you took every single dollar from anyone making over 100 grand, you still wouldn't even be close. He turned his gaze directly toward AOC and asked seriously how she is paying for this because he wants to see the actual numbers. AOC began her response by saying, "We fund it the same way we funded the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan." Trump cut her right off, saying he wants specific numbers and asking where $93 trillion is coming from. She had no answer, and the silence in the room became incredibly awkward because an answer doesn't exist. Trump said, his tone turning dead serious, that she just made the whole thing up and drafted a proposal that looks great in a tweet. You are looking to wipe out 10 million fossil fuel jobs, wreck whole industries, and blow money we don't even have. He pulled up even more data from independent experts saying the Green New Deal would be a total catastrophe. It would crush the economy, kill millions of jobs, and send poverty rates soaring because this isn't a strategy, but a fairy tale. Trump stepped out to the center of the stage and noted she keeps bringing up Nordic countries and Danish socialism. He asked if she knew the Prime Minister of Denmark explicitly told Bernie Sanders to stop calling them a socialist nation. They have free markets and corporate tax rates that are actually lower than ours, meaning they are a capitalist country with strong social programs. He pointed a finger right at her and said she doesn't even understand the very countries she is using as her examples. This is just embarrassing because she has a degree in economics, yet doesn't seem to grasp the basics. You put forward a $93 trillion plan with absolutely no funding behind it, and keep citing countries that aren't even socialist. He delivered his final line with flawless timing, stating, "This isn't a policy, but a bedtime story. Americans aren't going to shell out $600,000 per household for a fairy tale that she has no explanation for." Drop a no deal in the comments if you are standing with Trump, as AOC was visibly shaken but tried to pivot back. She claimed to be a Bronx native who truly understands the daily struggles of working-class families. "Stop right there," Trump interjected, holding up his hand, and told her to just stop because she is not from the Bronx. He produced official property records and said the narrative works better when those streets aren't in wealthy suburbs. "You were raised in Yorktown Heights, which is Westchester County, and one of the wealthiest areas in the entire country." A map flashed on the screen with Yorktown Heights clearly showing the median home value is $450,000. The median household income sits at $96,000 with top-tier public schools, low crime, and stunning neighborhoods. Trump turned his gaze toward the audience and said, "This is nothing like the Bronx or the gritty urban environment she pretends to represent. These are high-end suburbs where people commute to Manhattan for six-figure salaries, and images began to appear on the screen. They showed gorgeous houses and tree-lined streets, while he explained her father was a successful architect, and her mother worked in real estate. You attended Boston University, where tuition costs $60,000 a year, so you were given every possible advantage. He pivoted to face her directly and said she markets herself as a girl from the streets who beat the odds. In reality, you grew up in privilege and had opportunities most Americans could only dream of, Trump said, stepping closer. You spent a couple of years bartending after college, but plenty of people work as bartenders, and it is just a job. You act like you were some oppressed worker struggling to survive, he said with a dismissive shake of his head. You had a degree from an elite expensive university and chose to work at a bar while figuring out your next career move. That isn't a hardship, but just a typical post-grad job search, and everyone has to work, including my own kids. The contrast was obvious, and Trump hammered it home, saying he actually grew up in Queens and not as a rich kid. My father built actual apartment complexes, and I spent my summers working construction, so I know what real working-class life looks like. He pointed his finger directly at her and accused her of fabricating a whole persona because the girl from the Bronx makes a good story. It is just branding and marketing, like putting an Instagram filter on your entire life story. But it is simply not the truth. Trump's voice grew even louder as he told her she isn't authentic and is nothing more than a product. You are a carefully designed and focus-grouped product who doesn't represent the working people, but just uses their struggle. You live in luxury and attend $35,000 events, and the crowd erupted in cheers. I have never lied about who I am because I am wealthy, and I love it and am proud of what I achieved. He gestured over at her and said she pretends to be working class when she is clearly not and claims to be from the Bronx. You act like you understand the struggle despite living a life of privilege. And his closing remark was absolutely cutting. At least I am honest about my identity, but who are you really, Alexandria? Share this if you see through the fake narrative that she is from the Bronx when she went to a university costing $60,000 a year. Trump wasn't finished yet, and turned to a different section of his files to talk about her grandmother in Puerto Rico. AOC's face turned pale because she knew exactly where he was heading with this, and that she used her grandmother for political gain. You turned down help, which is heartless, after you posted all about your grandmother's damaged house in Puerto Rico following Hurricane Maria. You talked about how she was still stuck in those awful conditions years later and used her to attack me and criticize the federal response. He brought up her tweets on the big screen showing her posts about her grandmother's plight and agreed it was a sad situation. Trump took a brief pause, then his tone grew much more intense as he asked what conservatives did when they heard about it. They started a fundraiser to help her out and raised over $100,000 of real money from real people. The specific number appeared on the screen as $14,153 raised to help an elderly woman. Do you know what happened to that money? Trump asked, staring directly at AOC, stating her office turned it down. You refused to let your own grandmother get that help just because it came from conservatives, and the audience let out a gasp. The official statement from AOC's office appeared on the screen, declining the funds that were raised for her grandmother. You said no because accepting help from your opponents would destroy your narrative that conservatives actually care about people. We can't have that, can we? Trump said with his voice reaching a crescendo and genuine anger breaking through. This is your grandmother and your own flesh and blood. Yet people tried to help her, and you blocked it for political reasons. He turned to address the audience and asked if her home ever actually got repaired or if she received any help. He turned back to face AOC once more and answered that she didn't get the help. CNBC blared the headline that markets rallied on AOC humiliation, and investor confidence shot up as socialist policies were rejected. The conservative media machine went into full-blown overdrive, and Fox News replayed the entire debate 3 separate times within the first day. Hannity dedicated whole episodes to every single point Trump drove home, and Tucker Carlson ran a series on the economic basics she missed. Laura Ingraham brought on experts every night to break down the $93 trillion disaster of the Green New Deal. Even the mainstream media couldn't look away, because the viewership numbers were just too massive to ignore. CNN was forced into non-stop coverage, with panels looking visibly pained as they tried and failed to spin her performance. MSNBC even brought on economists who had to admit Trump was spot on about the Green New Deal's price tag. The New York Times ran a fact check that backed up most of Trump's claims about her expensive lifestyle and the Amazon fiasco. The bartender economics meme blew up everywhere, with viral photos of AOC behind a bar edited with economics textbooks. Clips of her claiming unemployment is low because people have 2 jobs started playing on an endless loop on the internet. That Met Gala photo of her in the Tax the Rich dress became the ultimate symbol of progressive hypocrisy in campaign ads. Suddenly, the decision to kill the Amazon headquarters deal looked completely vindicated, and business leaders finally felt they could speak up. The New York Post screamed from the front page that AOC cost the city 25,000 jobs, and Trump had just reminded everyone. Local politicians who had kept their heads down started openly calling out her lack of economic understanding. You could see the total collapse just by looking at her social media stats, as her Twitter mentions flipped to being negative. Her Instagram comments turned into a total battlefield, and not even her most loyal followers could justify taxing the rich while attending galas. The polls showed just how devastating the fallout really was, as her approval rating in her district tanked to 24%. Nationally, her support among Democrats plummeted down to 33%, and among independent voters, she dropped to a staggering 11%. When asked if they would support her for higher office, a massive 68% said no, and a serious primary challenger emerged. A businesswoman with a real track record of building companies launched a video packed with highlights from the debate stage. She said Alexandria likes to talk about economics, but she is the one who actually understands it, and she raised millions quickly. Democratic leadership started making a public exit, with Nancy Pelosi giving a curt response saying, "Every member speaks for themselves." Chuck Schumer played it safe, calling the party a big tent, but flat-out refused to back AOC's specific stances. Moderate Democrats used the debate as an excuse to start publicly tearing into the Green New Deal and other socialist ideas. Without much fanfare, AOC was quietly stripped of her committee assignments, which everyone knew was a direct punishment. She had officially become political poison due to her ties to failed socialist plans and her lack of economic sense. The squad's entire influence crumbled almost overnight, and Ilhan Omar and others saw their own numbers dive just by association. Members of the Progressive Caucus started keeping their distance to save themselves as democratic socialism became a national punchline. Tax the rich was now just shorthand for champagne socialist hypocrisy, and even The Atlantic dropped a brutal piece about her loss. Written by a progressive economist, it detailed every single mistake and every moment her lack of knowledge was laid bare. The article tore into her confusion over unemployment stats and her failure to explain how to pay for the Green New Deal. The final verdict was absolutely devastating, stating her performance didn't just wreck her career, but set the movement back a generation. By failing to hold her ground and by living the very life she criticized, she gave the opposition effective weapons. It will take years for future progressives to overcome the damage dealt in those 90 minutes. And the article went viral. Exactly 1 month after the debate, AOC called a press conference and read from her notes with a slight tremor. She announced she wouldn't be seeking re-election in 2026 after reflection and talks with her family and constituents. She said she decided to step away to serve the community in other ways, but everyone knew the real story. Trump had effectively ended her political career in just an hour and a half, and the cultural impact reached far beyond. The debate between capitalism and socialism had been settled for good in the American mind, and support for socialist policies plummeted. Business schools across the country began adding the debate to their programs as a case study for multiple subjects. Economics professors used it to show the gap between theory and practice, teaching students what happens when ideology hits mathematical truth. Communications departments analyzed it as a master class in preparation versus improvisation, and political science classes studied it as a turning point. Harvard Business School developed a full case study on what happens when social media fame meets economic scrutiny. The case looked at how her online success created a false sense of confidence in policy areas where she lacked expertise. It became required reading in several MBA programs as an example of how public image can hide a lack of competence. At Stanford, the economics department used clips from the debate specifically focusing on Trump's breakdown of why her unemployment claims were impossible. One professor noted in his syllabus that this is why economics is a discipline that requires math and not just good intentions. 2 months after the debate, Trump held a massive rally in the South Bronx, which was the real Bronx. This was not the wealthy Westchester suburbs where she actually grew up, and the symbolism was both intentional and devastating. Over 25,000 people showed up, packing every available inch of the park, representing a diverse mix of working-class New Yorkers. They had watched their supposed representative get exposed as a fraud on national television, and local news coverage was everywhere. NY1 interviewed attendees who were fed up with her representation, with one resident saying she told us she was from here. Then we find out she is actually from some rich neighborhood and doesn't know the first thing about the Bronx. Another person added, she is the one who chased away 25,000 jobs that his cousin could have been working. When Trump finally took the stage, the roar from the crowd was deafening, and he stood there soaking in the energy. This was AOC's home turf, yet they were cheering for the billionaire capitalist who exposed her, not the socialist who claimed to speak for them. The real Bronx, Trump yelled into the microphone, distinguishing it from Westchester and emphasizing its authenticity. You know Alexandria said she was from here, but she is not, because she is from Yorktown Heights, which is very expensive. She just told everyone she was from here because it sounded better for her brand, and he let the crowd boo. We had a debate a couple of months ago that was the biggest in history, and we went head-to-head on capitalism versus socialism. The crowd began chanting capitalism, and Trump smiled, letting the chant build before raising his hands for silence. Do you know what happened? He asked, answering that economics happened along with math and reality. I hit her with straightforward questions about finding money for a $93 trillion bill and why she drove Amazon away. Why do you complain about a salary when the average American gets by on less? And how do you justify that dress? She sat there in silence because there simply aren't any answers, and socialism just doesn't work. It never has in the past, and it never will in the future. And when you hold it up to basic math, it falls apart. The audience was hooked, hanging on to every syllable as he explained that socialism buckled under its own absurdity. As for Alexandria, well, she is finished and isn't seeking re-election, So she is stepping away for good at only 36. When he brought up her retirement, the room went wild with a standing ovation that lasted 7 full minutes. People were literally jumping for joy and hugging their neighbors as a massive USA chant filled the air. "You want to know the best part?" he asked, saying it wasn't him who took her down, but economics and math. Her own conflicting stories are what took her down, and I was just the one who highlighted them. He waved a hand toward the crowd, saying, "That is exactly what we are going to keep doing. We are going to keep standing up for capitalism and showing the American people that socialism fails every time. We are going to keep fighting for freedom and opportunity, because America is not a socialist nation. This isn't a place where former bartenders get to lecture billionaires on how the economy works, but the land of opportunity." That final line absolutely brought the house down, and he declared that is not going to change. "God bless capitalism and God bless America," he said, marking a battle that was far more than just a simple debate. This was a battle between capitalism and socialism, experience versus ideology, and reality versus fantasy, with reality winning clearly. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez represented a movement that had gained dangerous momentum based on the idea that social media fame could replace expertise. She stood for the notion that you can bash capitalism while reaping its rewards and preach equality while living in luxury. Trump shattered that illusion in just 90 minutes, without relying on cheap insults but by using cold, hard facts. He provided cost breakdowns she couldn't explain and gave documented proof of her economic confusion despite her college degree. He brought up the Amazon fiasco, the unemployment gaffes, the unfunded plan, and the Westchester privilege masked as struggle. Every bit of it was documented and proven, showing the country you can defend capitalism and call out double standards. He proved that socialism cannot answer the most basic economic questions, no matter how it is rebranded or sold. It still doesn't have a way to pay for its promises and requires trashing wealth just to chase poverty. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez actually thought she could school a billionaire on economics because she had a degree and a social media following. She believed her progressive status would be enough to win, and that she could sell socialism as a trendy fix. She thought her carefully crafted story would protect her from anyone looking too closely at her actual plans. She turned out to be wrong about every single thing.